Hi there. In this video, I'm going to give you an insight into how you can make sure your students are as successful as possible in answering 2-mark questions. And it's aimed at any of us teaching AQA GCSE religious studies, with a focus on Christianity in this instance. Although the approach we look at today will work for whichever religion your students have studied. This type of 2-mark question appears both on paper 1 and paper 2, and therefore it should be quite straightforward for most of your students. However, there are a couple of things worth noting to make sure students are able to maximise their marks on this question and minimise the time it takes them to answer it, leaving them a bit more time for those later questions in each section which are worth more marks. Now you can see on the screen an example of how the question will likely be laid out in the answer booklet. As is normally the case, the answer booklet gives more than enough space for students to answer these types of questions. It's important to note, though, that just because each answer space has 2 lines, students shouldn't feel like they have to write in full sentences to answer this question. For this question, examiners are very used to awarding full marks for relevant points that are written in the style of bullet point notes. Indeed, if a student is able to answer this question in 2 minutes, then they are well within the time constraints placed on them by the exam board. And most students will likely complete this question in a minute or less, which is great, as to reiterate, it gives them a little more flex for the questions later in the section that account for more marks. The mark scheme gives some good general advice for students answering this question. It even goes into detail regarding a scenario where students happen, for whatever reason, to give more than the requisite 2 answers. If they happen to do this, then as a firm rule, the first 2 answers are the only ones that become relevant for the examiner. And the second point explains how this remains the case regardless of where our students happen to write their answers in the space given to them in the answer booklet. What you can see now in the mark scheme as well is that for this question there are over 20 different possible answers that could get credited. This is another example of how the examiners are absolutely committed to crediting a student's answer wherever possible and wherever relevant. This should give you confidence as a teacher that your students, provided they can decode the term incarnation in this instance, should reasonably be able to pick up 2 out of 2. The problem comes when students get thrown by this kind of technical religious terminology. So as a teacher, make sure your students have ample opportunity to learn the key terminology throughout the school year, so that they can be successful when answering this type of question under pressure. So just to be clear, an answer as brief as this one will still get your student 2 marks out of 2 on this question. As highlighted earlier, often students will write even less and still pick up the marks. As a result, it isn't a question your students should worry too much about, or crucially spend too much time on, and providing they know their key terminology, these questions should not pose too much of a cognitive or timing challenge. And that's it for this video on 2-mark questions for both Paper 1 and Paper 2 of the AQA GCSE Religious Studies exam. I'm Andy from Propello, and if you'd like any more help with your religious studies teaching or resources, then please just visit us at propello.com/UK and sign up for a free account.